I think Downing Street think we're working on a plan. We think our proposal is probably cleverer and addresses a lot of the concerns that the DUP have had. And I think they're, I don't want to say confident, but I think that there's a reason Rishi's going out to bat for this, and that's that he probably thinks he's I don't want to say solved the riddle of Northern Ireland, but he's pretty confident in what he's working on.
Really interesting, Kate. I mean, you're painting a picture of a fairly upbeat mood, even as the headlines pile in about scores of Tory MPs ready to rebel, about ministers ready to resign.
Well, look, there's two things. I think Rishi and the team around him think they've made progress on what the agreement can look like. And it's I don't want to get too down in the weeds for your listeners, but effectively, the thing that's quite a crunch issue is this thing called democratic deficit, which is, can you give Northern Ireland Assembly powers to shape the EU laws that they're having to live under?
Yes.
And then in with that comes the ECJ issue.
Yes.
Anyway, I think Rishi, down in the number 10 bunker, there's a reason he went to Northern Ireland, a reason he did that meeting with the EU, because he thinks, I'm making progress on the ideas here. Now, that's fine. You walk into Parliament yesterday or today, and what is clear is that he is facing a huge wave of criticism and animosity and opposition, basically, from a lot of Tory MPs. Before I came here, I was in committee corridor in Parliament lurking outside a meeting which the DUP were having with the ERG, which is the Tory group of hardcore Brexiteers, and where they were talking about their concerns and presumably thinking of a way to go forward. And, it did feel a bit like 2018 when we were lurking in corridors, listening to different factions of the Conservative Party or different groups within Westminster work out what they thought about Theresa May's latest deal. How are they going to oppose it? And what happened there? They opposed it each and every time, and it blew up each and every time, didn't it? So I'm not saying that they're super upbeat, that they're going to kind of steamroller it through the party. What I mean is that there's a sort of, I guess, positivity that they had a good idea that this agreement is an improvement on the last one. But politics, the reality of politics could well tear all that up.
Yeah. What are you picking up? How do you read the runes, Rachel?
I would love to know what the Tory Brexiteers who are against this and who are ready to blow it all up, as Kate said, what they would do instead. Because fundamentally, you could have the border on the Irish Sea, which was suggested at various points, and would sort of leave Northern Ireland outside of the rest of the UK. Nobody wants that, least of all the DUP. You can have a hard border on the island of Ireland between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Well, maybe someone on the DUP wouldn't mind too much about that, but everyone else looks at that with sort of sheer horror, and rightly so. Or, and it does feel like this is sort of the Jacob Rees-Mogg approach, you can try and convince the Republic of Ireland that really they want to leave the EU too, and then we wouldn't have this issue. We'd have our border between the British Isles and mainland Europe. Thank you very much. No issue at all. But short of kind of going over and invading the Republic of Ireland and saying, we're going to Brexit for you, there isn't a solution here that doesn't involve some degree of compromise with the EU and some degree of oversight from EU regulators. So I'm not saying it's Rishi Sunak's deal, which none of us have seen, is ideal or will solve all of the challenges, and clearly it won't, and clearly it can't please everyone. But I don't see what the Tory Brexiteers are angling for as an alternative. It does feel a lot like 2018 in the words being used, the narratives, the vibes, the characters in play. Certainly there's some nostalgia there, but the country has moved on. People are basically sick of talking about Brexit. They're much more concerned about the cost of living crisis, energy bills, the NHS strikes, any number of other things. We don't want another couple of years wrangling over this. The Tory party doesn't have the support to get Brexit done that it did, because it tried that once already. So what do the ERG want? What are they suggesting?
Yeah, well, the ERG is not a single entity. They're not one homogenous group of people. They have different views. But for the hardest line Brexiteers, okay, it is about pure Brexit theology, isn't it? That's what it's about. A lot of what they've been given, because we do know something of this, it's what a lot of Brexiteers were calling for at an early stage. The idea of goods getting into Northern Ireland from mainland Britain with the stuff that's meant to stay in Northern Ireland going through a green lane, no problem. Red lane, if it's meant to go on to the Republic of Ireland. That was part of the Brexiteers' pitch. And the idea of exchanging information as goods cross the Irish Sea in real time. That was part of the pitch. And they've got those things.
I'm gonna break it down because I don't think this is a row about customs. So there's a few things that happens with the Brexit deal and with the Northern Ireland Protocol. One of the things that's caused problems in Northern Ireland is these extra custom checks going from goods from mainland GP to Northern Ireland and vice versa. The so-called border down the Irish Sea. Now, everyone agrees that should be torn up and that you should share information real time. They want these green lanes and these red lanes. So GB goods to Northern Ireland don't get checked. It's just the EU ones that would. That's pretty non-contentious. And I think that is a deal there, ready to be done, no problem. Your big political crunch issue is a more complicated one, which is that the DUP want more say, or want the Northern Irish Assembly to have a proper say in the laws they live under. And until that happens, they're refusing to go into power sharing. Now, without the DUP in power sharing, because of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process, you have a constitutional crisis and no working government there.
That's not an unreasonable demand.
And that is not an unreasonable demand. And that is the far, far trickier issue. So if this was just a row about EU customs checks, I think we could get around that with basically broad consensus. But the thing is with Rishi, the thing that I guess he has to decide is this deal really about restoring power sharing? In which case, effectively, the DUP can bullet it. They can have a veto, right? Because you have to get the DUP on board to bring back power sharing. Or do you sort of, I guess, phase them down and try and do this deal, which might not bring back power sharing, in which case was it worth the political capital? And that's, I think, what's facing the PM.
We will dive a bit into the weeds here because this story exists in the weeds.
It does,
And the point that you make about giving the Northern Ireland Assembly a say, a voice on what happens to the regulations that govern trade in the future, as we say, not an unreasonable demand, you would think. That does depend on the restoration of the devolved institutions. That involves getting the Northern Ireland Assembly up and going and an executive up and going again. And that's really the strategy behind it. I think they're giving the DUP here, are they not, more than they expected them to get, more than the DUP expected they were going to be offered. But to take full advantage, they've got to go back into power sharing. And there's a slight problem there. Don't know quite how big. I'm not steeped in Northern Ireland politics. But is there this cultural, institutional reluctance on the part of the DUP just to play second fiddle to Sinn Féin in a devolved government?
That certainly, I'm sure, plays into it, right, the outcome of the last elections. I also wouldn't want to delve too far into that. I don't know the intricacies of that much. But effectively, I think the standoff here will all come down to the DUP. It always does. But I don't think Rishi's going to think it's worth expending this huge amount of political capital, potentially having quite a civil war in his own party, at least temporarily, if he doesn't get power sharing, he doesn't get the DUP over. Now, it may be that the agreement or the deal that Rishi is proposing gets it enough over the line that they think there is a way back. But we'll have to see.
And the DUP,
that's the big question.
The DUP, we're casting the line a bit forward here. The DUP could say, look, OK, let's give it a shot. Let's see how this works. And make judgments as we go along. So you don't, as I think the phrase has been used, not about saying yes, it's just about not saying no. Now, and we were mentioning this earlier on, Rachel, weren't we? How, look, Boris Johnson was there, potentially getting ready to kick off on the sidelines. He went into that last election. We all know now, it's chiselled into history, that he said there was a deal. It was oven ready. Vote for me, vote for us, and we'll get Brexit done. Just remind ourselves, have a listen.
Really do now is go to our people, go to the country and say, come on, let's get this thing done. We've got an oven-ready deal. Put it in the microwave as soon as we get back on after the election on Friday, on the 12th of December. Get it done, and then let's get on with our domestic agenda. If you vote for us and we get our programme through, which we will, because as I say, it's oven ready, it's there to go, then we can be out at the absolute latest by January next year.
Oven ready, oven ready, oven ready. And we also know, because we got the testimony on the record, on tape, of the Reverend Ian Paisley Jr., who told us now that Boris Johnson said to him, look, we'll do this deal, and when we get into office, we'll tear it up. Which was, it's not about, is that evidence of bad faith? If that's not conclusive evidence of bad faith, I don't know what is. And now Boris Johnson kicking off, getting ready to kick off again and saying, look, don't even think about tearing up the legislation, which would allow us to put aside the Northern Ireland Protocol, which he said was an oven-ready deal. You can see where Boris Johnson's motives are being rather, I don't know, how do I understate it sufficiently? Rather doubted, Kate.
Well, whatever about his motives, Boris is Mr. Brexit, as Donald Trump once famously called him. And I think any intervention by Boris on this is huge. So we had it over the weekend when we all had the source quote from a source close to Boris, warning, don't ditch the Northern Ireland Protocol bill, this bit of legislation he drafted, which has been kicked into the long grass under Rishi, but effectively it lets you unilaterally tear up the protocol. I think that politically, we go back to the politics of it, all eyes should be on Boris, because I think if Boris decides to lead this rebellion, that spells massive trouble for Rishi.
Yeah, he's still a power in the land,
He's a huge power still.
And meanwhile, in the sidelines, meanwhile, I was reading one of the Boris supporters saying that they're going to try. No, actually, one of those who resents the Conservative Party for dumping Boris and then Liz Truss, saying they could dump 60 MPs from the candidates list at the next election as a kind of punishment for all of that. I mean, this man Boris he's still a force.
This is the grassroots movement, isn't it? This is this group that basically says, bring back Boris, and if not, we'll deselect you. I have to say one thing for Boris Johnson is he did have a remarkable ability to come up with a phrase that would just cut through the sort of public consciousness and all the mud, and people can remember the phrase, they remember get Brexit done, they remember oven-ready Brexit deal, and to just sort of rally support around some sort of rhetoric. I think Rishi Sunak needs that help now. Why does he not have someone saying, this is an M&S oven-ready deal, or this is a sort of supersonic microwave deal? I don't know. I don't cook. I'm not allowed in the kitchen. The point is that it's very clear that Boris Johnson either hadn't read the deal that he inflicted upon the British people at that election, or certainly hadn't thought through all the implications of it and what it would actually mean for Northern Ireland and for businesses. And if that comment is true, and he said to some people, don't worry about it, we'll tear it up later, that tells you everything you need to know. It doesn't help us now. We are in a situation that is, we can see the impact of where we've come since 2019. We can see the impact it's having on businesses. We can see the impact it's having on the economy. Northern Ireland, doesn't have a functioning executive government at the moment because the DUP are refusing to go into power sharing. It's sort of worth pointing out when we talk about democratic deficit, by the way, that the DUP, sort of broadly pro-Brexit, the people of Northern Ireland, very, very much pro-Remain. So there's that aspect of it too. We have to be pragmatic, and I can't expect Boris Johnson to be pragmatic because he's very bitter about the way that he left office. But I guess I just have a tiny spark of optimism that there are enough MPs in the Conservative Party who are looking at their polling ratings at the moment, looking at the state of the economy, looking at the cost of living crisis, looking at everything else and going, the last thing we need right now is a rerun of the Brexit wars of 2018.
Our listener, Phil, he's texted, and keeping the DUP on side in the Northern Ireland protocol reforms is vital, but Rishi should tell the treacherous and self-obsessed ERG, the European Research Group, to do one. Finding a better outcome, getting Stormont function again is what is important. That's Phil's view. Last word with you, Kate.
Actually, following up from what Rachel was saying, I was doing a focus group last week with More in Common. It was a focus group in Lee, and to be fair, this Northern Ireland Protocol thing had only just started emerging. It was late last week, but what was clear is they hadn't heard anything about this, and they weren't following it, and they thought Brexit was done, and that's what they've been told. And their concerns, you're right, were small boats, cost of living, strikes. And so the danger is that I think restoring power sharing in Northern Ireland, obviously hugely politically important, but the danger for Rishi is that he gets sucked up by this factional Brexit row while the rest of the country and voters that will decide the next election for him are talking about something else.
Rishi Sunak has got a thin path to success, thinner than a tightrope. He can't back down on this, or he will be punished. The Labour Party will be in there, swooping in there, saying, we will sort this out. You couldn't. And a lot of the country just want to see this sorted out. If he tries to override his opponents, even maybe going without using a bet, he'll be storing up all sorts of hostility for the future, and it will descend on him, like a storm, if not before, then at the May elections when the Tories are expected to get a bit of a pasting. There is no easy route here for Rishi Sunak.